I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Amy Fong, partner, leads Everest Group's sourcing and vendor management practice. In this role, she advises enterprises on maximizing value from strategic provider relationships in global services categories. Banushi Malhotra is a practice director in Everest Group's sourcing and vendor management practice. In this role, she advises clients on maximizing value through their supply-based engagements to obtain cost, business, and operational benefits. Sahil Lumba, senior analyst, is a member of the sourcing and vendor management team and assists clients on topics related to strategic sourcing, category management, vendor management, and RFX events across industries. He is also actively involved and driving initiatives in the areas of impact sourcing and sustainability. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Amy.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. We're happy to be here today. We'll be sharing the results of our Pinnacle study on IT sourcing, and happy to have the team here to share this. We'll be going through the results during this session, taking a few questions at the end, and then we'll also be heading over to LinkedIn to do a LinkedIn Live after. So if you'd like a little bit more of a casual conversation about these topics, about IT sourcing in general, jump over there after, and I'm sure we'll have the link in the chat that you can catch us on. So with that, I want to turn it over to Banushi. He's going to talk a little bit about the scope of our Pinnacle model, how it works, and the methodology here. I do want to point out that these studies that we do to compare companies to each other are always open to our Outsourcing Excellence members. So if you're a member of our programs and you want to take this study, you missed it before, you're always welcome to come and assess yourself, and we'll plot you on this the Pinnacle matrix. So Banushi, why don't you start us off?
Thanks, Amy. Great point there, right? That so these Pinnacle studies are always open to members, and we've covered all the foundational topics already. We have services sourcing, we have supplier management, we have contingent workforce management. But this study in particular focuses on IT sourcing, right? And when we talk about IT sourcing, we just mean the upstream procurement processes that are related to this. So the top three that are mentioned in this slide are the process dimensions that we've covered in this study, starting from category management and strategic sourcing, just defining your needs, doing a market assessment, running your sourcing process, to entering the second one, which is contract management, maintaining your contract database. And this is sort of the natural progression to your strategic sourcing process, right? And ongoing supplier management, which talks about managing your performance scorecards with suppliers, driving innovation with suppliers, and just managing risk as a whole with suppliers. So these are the overall processes that we've covered, in our study. But what we haven't covered is something that goes into the downstream, right? So we haven't gotten into P2P. We don't talk about rec to PO, and we're not getting into accounts payable and invoice to settlement type of processes. So this is the scope we've covered within our study. And as we already communicated, we're talking about IT today. So all the IT category managers, IT strategic sourcing professionals, they will find great value in this session. But along with that, even leaders such as CPOs and indirect procurement leads, they'll also find great value in this session, because we have insights to share which are not only valid across IT, of course, which is one of the most early adopter category when it comes to procurement, but these insights are also valid somewhat across other categories as well, as it happens in procurement as a whole. So without further ado, I'll jump right into our Pinnacle model. And this is what our dot plot looks like, right? So this is the overall view of the assessment that we've done over the past couple of months. And basically what we're trying to show you is that we have a capability versus impact dot plot, right? So each dot that you see on this particular plot represents an enterprise that we have surveyed and we have spoken to as well, and gathered insights across these sourcing leaders within the IT sourcing space. And we've plotted them in terms of their capability, and we've plotted them in terms of their outcome as well. So when we talk about capabilities, you need to look at the x-axis over here. We have 5 capabilities that we've covered for the IT sourcing area, starting with sourcing strategy and implementation, which is talking about the tactics that people use while sourcing, some of the supplier selection criteria, negotiation tactics, and all of these important aspects. Moving on to technology, which is talking about the digital levers that sourcing professionals are using across their IT sourcing categories, IT sourcing processes such as category management or supplier management, contract management, etc. And moving on to use of market intelligence services, which we feel is very important as to what activities you're actually getting data from the market from, and how much budget have you allocated to the whole market intelligence aspect, so that you're more and more in touch with the market while you're sourcing. The next capability that we've covered is governance and performance, which talks about performance when it comes to procurement, as to how procurement is measuring their own performance when it comes to the procurement performance scorecard. Are you looking at just traditional aspects such as savings, or are you also looking at other value-adding aspects such as how much time you're taking to source, or how much innovation you're driving in the organization? And the last one we have assessed over here is process compliance, which is something that we see many sourcing professionals are struggling with, right? To convince your business leaders to actually follow procurement policies and guidelines and have this entire structure in place that business leaders are complying with. So these are the 5 capabilities that we've covered, and we've plotted them against the outcomes that enterprises are able to drive for these, which is across cost, operational, and business impact. And as you can see, the plot, it's a straight line, right? So if you develop the right capabilities, you're definitely going to get to the right outcomes. And that is something we see across a lot of our pinnacles. And I think that's really great that you do get to the right outcomes if you are, taking the right steps. So we have about 7 pinnacles, which are the best-in-class enterprises, as we call them. And we're going to be comparing the results of the pinnacle enterprises with other enterprises throughout this deck, as you see forward. So the first thing that we've assessed over here are the business impacts, right? So we want to show you what type of outcomes enterprises are driving through this pinnacle model assessment. And if we jump to the next slide, we'll see that we've divided it into cost, operational, and business impact, right? So the first one, cost impact, talks about how much the overall procurement performance scorecard, as I spoke about, how much savings are you driving across cost reduction, working capital improvement, or even cost avoidance. So we saw that Pinnacle Enterprises realized 1.25x more cost reduction savings as compared to other enterprises, and similar results with improving working capital as well, right? And when we looked at overall cost impact, it's not just, of course, about driving savings. We also looked at the models that they were driving within their services categories. When it comes to pricing models, Pinnacles were using more of outcome-based pricing models, more gain-sharing agreements as well. So all of those nuances also come in when we look at cost impact. The second aspect that we saw within impact was operational impact. And the first thing that we assessed over there was strategic sourcing timeline, right? So how much time are you actually taking from your requirements definition phase to your contract execution phase? So we did see that Pinnacles were actually 27% faster than other enterprises, and they saw consistently high improvement in other types of operational metrics as well, such as having lesser contract complexity or having lesser risk levels. So this is something that we saw consistently in this study, as well as in the services sourcing pinnacle model assessment that we did a couple of years back, which was in the pre-COVID era. And it's amazing to see how the results are consistent, across the couple of years that we've been studying this. And the last one that we assessed was business impact. So we did see that Pinnacle Enterprises gained more, say, sourcing maturity and associated business benefits across categories. And when we talk about sourcing maturity, we are basically, we assess the maturity level across, whether you're a world-class category management category, or whether you're just average, or whether you're not mature across the IT categories such as telecom, app services, etc. Many varying results across categories. Telecom was doing amazingly well, whereas some of the digital services categories, as Sahil will show you later, were not doing so well. But overall, we saw that Pinnacles were doing a lot better. So with that, I want to hand it over to Sahil, who will take us through the data.
Sure. Thanks, Manushi. You all know, like, IT sourcing has become a strategic tool that CIOs and CPOs can use actually to deliver more value with less inputs, right? Um, and here I'll be talking about the commercial impact that has been achieved through the capabilities that Bhanushi was discussing. And we can see that Pinnacle organizations have been actually leveraging a lot of sourcing initiatives that are listed towards the left to drive the positive commercial outcomes, right? Whereas competitive bidding, direct negotiation, and supplier rationalization process, maybe in terms of portfolio consolidation or portfolio diversification, these are like one of the favorites in terms of favorite sourcing initiatives in terms of enhancing their overall commercial value. And towards the right, we can see the overall savings achieved by Pinnacle enterprises have been almost like 25% or 50% more than what the other organizations or enterprises have been achieving. These are like typically 2 to 4% higher than what other enterprises have been achieving using the same sourcing initiatives. So we can see that Pinnacle organizations have kind of a robust IT sourcing initiatives, and they are kind of delivering or achieving these values using these initiatives. If we move to the next slide, we'll see how the operational if we move to the next slide, we can have one of the quick polls on the operational benefits.
Yeah, let's open this up. Interesting slide from Sahil there on some of the initiatives people have enabled, and we would love to see what kind of benefits you've seen from your IT sourcing program. So if you're in an enterprise or you're somebody who, on the buy side, you're somebody who's doing sourcing of IT, whether it's services, software, hardware, please check all that apply. What kind of benefits have you achieved in the last 3 years? And the choices here are process improvement, service level enhancement, business agility, resource efficiency, cross-functional synergies, and risk mitigation. And I still see a lot of new responses coming in on the poll, so we'll give it another couple seconds for everyone to answer. The things are moving quickly, so my hope is that you're all checking a whole bunch of these. All checking every single one, right? Sorry, I missed the total cost of ownership on the bottom of this, the last one. All right, it looks like we're evening out, so maybe we can close the poll. And interesting. So when we look at what kind of savings people are enabling, I'm happy to see that many of you checked multiples here, or what type of benefits. The highest one was TCO, and I actually think that's a little bit different than what we saw in this study. So maybe we can talk about that later. If you want to jump on the live later, we can talk about what you're seeing versus what our data showed. But also a lot of benefits around process improvement, service level enhancement, and then interestingly, business agility and resource efficiency. A little bit lower on things like cross-functional and risk mitigation and spend aggregation. So why don't we jump into the next slide? And Sahil's going to talk about some of the benefits that people who took the study saw. Again, always happy to have more people take the study and tilt the results a little bit if you're seeing something different.
Yeah, so the idea around operational benefits is that traditionally sourcing was viewed more as a way to reduce cost, right? But companies now view it as an investment designed to, let's say, improve the overall capabilities and productivity and gain that competitive advantage, right? And through this slide, we can see how Pinnacle organizations have been driving operational benefits, and that's beyond spend and some of the commercial aspects, which is good to see, because they are more focusing around, let's say, the process improvement and service level enhancements, rather than the more traditional or conventional levers, which is like spend aggregation. And I think to some extent, the quick poll results that we saw, they are somehow aligned, as we saw that more than 50% of the participants have voted for process improvement and service level enhancements as their benefits achieved around operations outcomes. TCO, I think this is one of the surprising elements which we saw through our study, because we saw Pinnacle organizations and enterprises somehow lagging on driving benefits from TCO savings. But yes, again, like these are subjective again in terms of internal organizations maturity across these levels. So what we can see that through increasing strategic partnerships and robust, let's say, delivery contracts around quality services, Pinnacle organizations have been able to achieve these operational outcomes, right? And which we can see that they have been able to achieve this not even in a better sense, but even quicker, which we can see from the average turnaround time for strategic sourcing initiatives, which Pinnacle organizations are achieving in let's say, less than 3 months or so, yeah, close to 3 months, I guess, which the other organizations are maybe taking a month more than what Pinnacle organizations have been achieving, right? While other enterprises, again, tend to focus on cost and spend, which we saw through our studies, these Pinnacle organizations have been focused around process improvement and service level enhancement and business agility, which is quite commendable. If we move to the next slide, we'll see how different challenges, or what are the challenges around this landscape in terms of getting to those operational outcomes, right? So we can see that typically these Pinnacle organizations are facing challenges in let's say 4 buckets: risk, supplier issues, in-house challenges, and lack of market intel. We have seen that more than 85% of these Pinnacle organizations have actually said that there has been high risk and security concerns over the time, with more complex supplier ecosystem at present. In terms of even contracting, they're facing some challenges, and we'll see in later slides how these challenges around contracting or spend around in terms of spend under contract is also a challenge in terms of capturing the total value, right? So these, because of the evolving business objectives, I would say they are facing these sort of challenges. And also while talking to one of the tech companies during our interviews, we found that IT talent is also becoming a challenge over the time, right? Getting the right talent at the right price in the right location is also becoming one of the challenges for most of the IT sourcing leaders over the time. So this slide talks about the business outcomes, and we can see that most of the Pinnacle enterprises, or we rather saw that most of the Pinnacle enterprises have actually developed quite mature sourcing processes across IT categories, right? Whereas some of the more conventional IT categories, even other organizations and enterprises have been more mature, but there are some call outs in terms of more complex IT categories, let's say digital services, data analytics, or IT strategy and consulting, wherein I can say that data analytics and IT strategy, more than 90% of other enterprises actually said that they have lagging to average sort of a maturity state in terms of these, or rather sourcing processes around these categories, right? And they really need to, let's say, get onto these categories or transition their existing sourcing or robust processes, or rather translate their sourcing processes to these categories as well, to able to mature or get to that maturity level of the Pinnacle enterprises. And even Pinnacle enterprises have been facing some challenges around IT strategy and consulting, through which we can see the score is quite low in that space.
Yeah. So Stan and I were actually discussing with this with one of the tech leaders in a very large technology company, and we saw that at least in their company and multiple others, what we've seen is that for IT strategy, the CIOs are making the decisions, and procurement is relatively less involved, and this is why this particular gap is there in terms of sourcing maturity. Typically, the CIO's office have their own 1 or 2 preferred players, and they'll always go with that player when they want to. We all know the names of those players also, I think, and they always want to go with those players when it comes to IT strategy and consulting.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and I'm not surprised to hear it. I think when we look at consulting as a category outside of IT, just any type of consulting, it's very hard for sourcing teams to really guide and get upfront in the process because everyone has their favorite and the firm that they've worked with in the past. So it's a really challenging category, and it kind of crosses over into IT. So, you know, crosses IT as well as other functions. So that makes a lot of sense. But we do see Pinnacle's doing better there. So let's jump into the capabilities. So we've talked about kind of the overall, you know, study, the concept of our Pinnacles. We talked about the business impact we saw, which is really the results that Pinnacles generate, and some really interesting numbers there. Obviously, the next question is, well, how do you get there? What do they do differently? And that's what the capabilities section is designed to flesh out for us. So Banushi's going to talk through some of the major differentiators in from Pinnacle Enterprises and where they really shine.
Yeah. So I think this is all, like Amy described, it's all the things that we put on the x-axis, right? What do you do to get to the high level of impact? So sourcing strategy and execution. When we deep dive into what we've assessed over sourcing strategy and execution, it includes what are the tactics you're using for negotiations, what is the depth of the sourcing model that you're using, what are the approaches that you're using to actually drive value. And this talks not just about, again, savings, but it spans across the operational and business impact components as well. Then the next capability that we assessed was technology. You know, how much technology has been adopted across IT categories, which categories are at more maturity versus others. Use of market intel, you know, what are the activities for which procurement is using market intel? Is it just across cost benchmarking, or is it also across risk levels, or you know, is it also across just doing a general capability assessment across throughout time, so that you are able to, you know, gather market intelligence on a regular basis. The fourth one that we assessed was process compliance, which is just talking about, again, you know, how are your business stakeholders actually complying with your procurement processes and guidelines. And governance and performance. Do you have escalation matrices set in place? Do you have a, you know, set communication structure in place as to who will communicate with suppliers, who's doing the day-to-day tasks versus managing the leadership to leadership connect? All of these things come under governance. And the last thing that we assessed was performance, right? So procurement as a function. How are you assessing your own performance? And this is a question that we get very, very regularly from clients as to how we should, you know, capture our own value as a function. Should it just be on savings? Should it also be on, you know, sourcing timelines? Should it also be on other types of metrics as well? So all of these things as a whole contributed to our x-axis. And I'll jump into the first capability that we assessed, which is sourcing strategy and execution. So if we move to the next slide, we'll see that, you know, we try to ask enterprises to rate the level of maturity of the sourcing model. And here on the left side of this slide, we try to display the results of only Pinnacle enterprises, right? So what enterprises have done is rated on a scale of high, moderate, and low. And the scores that you see on this graph are the top score of 7, it was a Likert scale, right? So the score of 7 would indicate high maturity, whereas 0 would indicate that this process has not been adopted. So Sahil mentioned this, you know, before in the webinar as well, but spend, savings, and compliance visibility has been something that has a high maturity across Pinnacle enterprises. And that really tells about how important this particular aspect is, right? We saw that about, you know, 60% Pinnacle enterprises were actually striving for high level maturity in spend compliance. However, having said that, even though they were striving for that level and they do think that they have achieved that level, even at this point, 1/3 of services spend is still not visible across Pinnacle enterprises. So while Pinnacles are better than the other enterprises, overall spend visibility is still not at the level that we would typically like to expect from organizations. And this is another data point that has been consistent over the last couple of years, as we have seen, you know, in our previous Pinnacle model assessments as well. So very interesting to see consistent results across, but hopefully in the next one, we'll see some improvement and more services spend and process compliance will be visible. So if we, this was about sourcing model, you know, maturity. If we move to the next slide, we'll see that the supplier selection was also an important criteria in what we assessed for sourcing strategy and execution. we try to see what factors Pinnacle enterprises are assessing when they're going for their RFPs to suppliers. And what we saw was that typically the importance that Pinnacles are giving, if I have to give you the top two factors, they would be commercials. And the second would be your suppliers focus on the service level that you're asking for or the product that you're asking for. So these are the top two. But other factors that are also important was, your service capabilities and solution design, your geographic alignment, and your external market intelligence or recent supplier, references or successes in the market. So while all of these factors, I'm sure all sourcing professionals already know about these factors, would have known about these factors, but we did see some new factors as well, which is again coming down to the bottom of the slide, low priority areas, but these were still there, right? So ESG, how much is the supplier investing in ESG initiatives, or how much are they giving in terms of value added products or services? So these are also increasingly becoming important, and in fact we deep dove into the ESG aspect as well, right? And we found that responsible labor, human rights, supplier diversity, these were very, very critical elements when it comes to assessing suppliers on their ESG criteria. So interesting to see that the market is changing a little. These factors are not deal breakers yet, but they're definitely elements that enterprises are increasingly measuring and looking at. Great.
Thanks, Manushi. Really interesting. We're going to do another quick poll now. Interested to see what tactics people on the line are using when you're sourcing IT categories. And this is another select all that applies. So please click on any of these that your IT sourcing team has adapted. Volume consolidation or bundling deals. I see most of you picking that right now. That's a pretty 101. Increase offshore proportions. So have you moved more roles offshore, specifically services typically, reducing FTEs, strategic partnerships or co-innovation. Do you have predefined discounts? Do you have a gain sharing model? Often that is put in place when you're working with third parties that are helping to source, as well as one-time discount at the time of contract signing. So an upfront discount that maybe for signing a contract with a new provider or renewing. Interested to see where everyone ends up on this, and I think the results so far have not surprised me, but I'm going to give it another couple seconds before we show the results.
Amy, I love it that strategic partnership and co-innovation has also reached 67%. I think that's great.
Yeah, let me share this so everyone can see. So the highest was volume consolidation and bundled deals. Again, aggregating spend, right, across business units, across groups in the organization, wherever possible, or bundling different parts is a classic sourcing move. But I agree, Venushi, that number for strategic partnership and innovation is pretty impressive. I tend to think that that's a more complex, more mature motion or action to take. So it's nice to see that, that 68% of you are doing some kind of co-innovation or some kind of partnering. The lowest one on here doesn't surprise me, gain sharing. It's funny, I was at a roundtable of CPOs on Friday, and nice to be back in a room, and somebody asked about, do you have if you have third parties doing sourcing work, do you do gain sharing? And it's such a polarizing topic that they could all name firms that do gain sharing and firms that don't like gain sharing at all. And I can name individual consultants and outsource partners that like and hate gain sharing. So that it can be very complicated. There's a lot of pros and cons. It can also be very rewarding. So I'm not surprised to see that as a fairly low percent at 28, but everything else kind of falls in the middle, and these are all good tactics to have in place. So let's look at some of the tactics we saw in the study.
Yeah. I think gain sharing is also something that's usually used in a combination with other types of models, right? So individual gain sharing is something that we've also seen very, very rarely, but very consistent results. We saw very consistent results from the data that you all have also provided, volume consolidation is top in our data as well. About 80% of Pinnacle enterprises were using this negotiation tactic, bundling deals across their business leaders and, the, again, classic sourcing tactic. The second one that we saw was reduction in FTEs, and we saw that a lot of Pinnacle enterprises were undertaking automation in their IT roles, and they were trying to reduce FTEs because of that effort. So that was our second one. I think about half of Pinnacle enterprises were actually following this top tactic as well. And along with that, of course, year-on-year increase in offshore proportions and having a predefined discount built in place, and having there's a bonus or one-time discount at the time of contract signing, sort of like asking for a one-time discount because we're signing this deal with you, with the supplier. So all of these tactics, in fact, in my experience, I've seen that we tried to build these in when we built RFPs as well. So just in your pricing sheet, just asking for the one-time discount that you would give up front, or just asking for all those predefined discounts, volume related, what is your first year savings or your second year savings. So these are typical tactics that are built into your RFP stage as well, so that you don't, you get your best deal from the supplier in the first stage itself. You don't have to wait till the negotiation stage to actually get these best deals. So that is, about the negotiation tactics. And I think I'll hand over to Sahil, who's going to, talk to us about the technology aspect of it. How deep do we think Pinnacle enterprises are in using digital levers?
Sure. So this slide typically summarizes the digital and tech adoption of some of the tools that are available in the market across IT spend categories, or let's say the IT sourcing activities that are there, right? So we can see that with more focus on, let's say, the digital transformation and automation, tactical sourcing, spend management, and demand management have seen high penetration of these digital and tech tools that are available in the market, right? And the idea behind is to automate like repetitive, more manual tasks, and to make them more quicker and better with more accuracy and robustness, right? That's the idea behind high adoption in terms of these areas. Whereas we have also seen that there has been high adoption of basic analytics, which is not surprising to some extent, because most of the processes, even RFX processes, or even reporting or spend management, these basic analytics, most organizations have been using basic analytics while reporting and visualizations. Whereas the adoption of more advanced and more integrated workspaces with the application of these AI, ML, RPA is still underway. Like we have not seen high penetration or adoption of these more advanced, let's say, digital tools across these IT processes. Right. Even some enterprises, or there are some solutions available in the market which are like integrated category management workspaces, which tend to integrate some of the elements which category managers are actually using, like let's say the portfolio management strategies or solutioning, spend management that we talked earlier, even analytics related. Some of the aspects are available in the same package, which are mostly available in the market. Right. So again, I would say basic analytics, there has been high adoption across processes, but in terms of more advanced more advanced digital tools, even Pinnacle organizations or enterprises have been not that quicker in terms of adopting these tech and digital tools.
Yeah, I think, the key word in here, whenever I see the word spreadsheets and people, kind of considering that basic analytics, I think we're probably a bit behind on tools across the source to contract process. And that tracks with what I've seen in real life as well. Some companies have adapted some tools for this, but overall, it's not, homogenized, it's not fully matured, and there's still a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. So this slide talks about another differentiated parameter that we saw from our study. So this talks about the use of market intelligence, right? So we can clearly see that more than 50% of Pinnacle enterprises They are focusing on some of the other elements related to, let's say, cost benchmarking, supplier qualification, or category management or risk management, which are kind of buzz in terms of formulating the overall IT sourcing strategies, right? And even if we talk about the budget which has been allocated to these external professional market intelligence, these are humongous. If we talk about Pinnacle enterprises, so they are kind of allocating more than 70% of what other enterprises have been allocating towards this market intel thing, right? So these Pinnacle enterprises have either been investing around this market intel, or they have been leveraging external more professional, let's say, research to validate their business cases or take optimal sourcing decisions using all these market intel reports and studies.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting, and we asked this question a couple of years ago, or similar question in our services sourcing study of Pinnacle, which was similar, not specifically IT, but services across the board. And I think we saw pretty similar data. There was a huge difference in the amount spent on market intelligence for Pinnacles versus others. I would also call out that I think the net dollar amount here is a lot higher, which suggests that companies have been spending more and more on market intelligence, and that tracks as well with what I've seen in the industry in the last decade or so, of this not even being a thing, and then people start to do more category management and realize they really need to know the external market better. So that number has gone up from a sourcing team perspective.
Yeah.
I think we'd all like to see more market intelligence used for some of the things towards the bottom here, thinking more about, how do you use it to manage contracts better? How do you use it to build your total cost model, your TCO model? There's still a lot of opportunity, I think, even for Pinnacles.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting results that I also remember from the last study was that Pinnacles were driving a lot of incremental cost reductions through the use of market intel. I think the overall number was around 3 to 5% more cost reductions on top of what they were already achieving, which was driven by market intelligence use. So that was also a very, great outcome that we saw, that they were driving through the use of this.
Okay, so this slide talks about the overall compliance process, let's say, to the IT sourcing process. We can clearly see that Pinnacle organizations again outshine the other enterprises in terms of the robustness of the process compliance that is there, right? They have been able to manage or create robust sourcing process compliance through, let's say, best practices across IT categories. They even said that more than 86% of these Pinnacle enterprises have clearly defined and appropriate contractual liabilities in their contracts, right? Whereas other enterprises have been like less than 50% of other enterprises have these features around their process compliances. Even when we talk about, let's say, the use of analytics or leveraging analytics or other tools to, let's say, have more robust process compliances, Pinnacle enterprises have been way higher, or they have been leveraging analytics way higher than the other enterprises. We can see that 86% have been using analytics to perform maybe should cost model or inflation forecasting while creating their IT budgets, compared to just 21% of other enterprises using the same analytics tools, right? One sharp element that we saw during our study was related to spend under contract. We saw that even Pinnacle enterprises have been facing some challenges around spend control, or maybe we can call like just over 50% of these Pinnacle enterprises have like complete IT spend under contract, which is a challenge. I mean, they have to have like more robust processes across around capturing the spend under contract to have like more risk-free, or to manage the risk around the contracted spend, let's say, right? If we move to the next slide, we can see the overall governance model that Pinnacle enterprises have been using. So this is a standard approach. I mean, this is a standard sourcing governance process. that we kind of evaluated while discussing with these organizations during our interviews, that most of these organizations are following kind of a step-to-step process in order to lay out their governance approach. So most of the Pinnacle organizations have well-defined goals wherein they have like more measurable, achievable, and time-bound goals defined at the very early stage in terms of laying out a strong governance process. In terms of a governance structure as well, they actually recognize different governing functions and define key accountability across these governing stakeholders. We saw that more than 70% of Pinnacle enterprises follow a more standardized or centralized and standard sourcing model, right, which is consistent, let's say, across IT categories and across business units and regions. Whereas we do also see some Pinnacle enterprises calling out that there are some sort of flexibilities incorporated in this centralized sourcing model as well. So wherever there are some requirements in order to make it more, to make the process more agile, or to make the governance structure also more relaxed, there is that sort of flexibility available in the model as well, right? Then they have like clearly defined roles and responsibilities, again, to ensure that there is clear accountability across governing functions. Then in terms of establishing a clear communication matrix, we saw that more than 70% of Pinnacle enterprises have like well-defined meeting structures. They have like cadence of planning meetings and review meetings, and even escalation metrics have been well-defined around this step. Then finally, they also monitor performance on a continuous basis. This is to ensure that there has been the performance and service levels are actually maintained across strategic, business, and operational aspects, right? So there has been like continuous monitoring of performance around the sourcing model as well. If we move to the next slide, we'll see what actually goes into the performance, procurement performance, which is the internal procurement performance matrix, while monitoring this performance, internal performance, I mean, right? So we can see that apart from the more conventional commercial assessment areas, let's say the spend coverage or the savings or cost avoidance or other savings, we have seen that there has been high adoption or focus around the operational assessment areas as well. Let's say the turnaround time or resource accuracy, efficiency, and even the stakeholder feedback. So more than 70% actually, 70% of Pinnacle enterprises actually said that they have high focus around spend coverage, price variance, along with sourcing turnaround time and resource efficiency, and this final stakeholder satisfaction survey, which we somehow miss, which was somehow missing in the less mature organization. So they were more focused on, let's say, the more conventional commercial metrics and less on the operational metric side. So this structure tells us that all these parameters are important in terms of a complete evaluation of the overall procurement performance. So if we move to the next slide, we can, Amy will talk us through the key takeaways that we have in the webinar.
Thanks, Sahil. So great, lots of capabilities called out there. So I want to kind of wrap up and give some of the key takeaways here. Project lifecycle tracking, some of the things that you can think about if you were looking for the top 5 lists of things that you should be doing in your organization. The first one is lifecycle tracking, really robust management of the sourcing process and projects, as well as supplier management process. One of the reasons lifecycle tracking is important is that you really need to be seeing these projects through end to end, so that you are capturing the savings in the downstream processes. Just negotiating a good contract really doesn't matter if nobody buys off of it. So think about how you're looking at this end to end and rollout and implementation of sourcing engagements. Negotiation tactics are important in terms of things like volume consolidation, bundle deals. We talked about that, but also looking at, how do how do we tweak our offshore proportions? In IT right now, there's a shortage of technology skills and talent in a lot of different places. So looking at your location strategy and your portfolio of providers around that on the services side, also important on things like volume and bundling on the hardware software side. From a technology standpoint, we still see a lot of organizations using really basic analytics. We would like to see more mature and robust tools in place. So that's something to think about, right? How do we roll out the technology that we need specifically to source our technology, and then also to manage our providers? Things like contract performance management across service providers, much more mature, captures a lot more value potentially, but not really commonly used yet. Organizations should think about processes and policies that ensure compliance. And this one, at first glance sounds very basic to me, but in reality, having a robust process and a robust policy that really drives compliance is really important. The two go hand in hand. Just putting in a policy, you should have a procurement policy, a buying policy, purchasing policy, but that alone in most organizations today is not going to do it. You also need processes that make it really easy for people to buy, sourcing processes that make it very clear for how they can get what they need in a short time. Going through the source, working with sourcing shouldn't mean I just tacked on 6 months to my need. The process should be set up in a way that makes it easier for people to get what they need and to collaborate. And to capture those benefits, whether they be hard savings or the other benefits that come from the sourcing process. And then finally, thinking about how you monitor the procurement function holistically, focusing on efficiency, focusing on accuracy, along with the usual commercial metrics. So we always look at savings. That's not going to change. No CPO is going to get savings taken off of their scorecard, but looking at more complex metrics is important as well, and other types of value that we're driving. So those are kind of the key things that I get out of this, and that if I were to give a top 5 list, I would suggest. I think the next thing is that we want to give an offer to buyers who are on here. So if you're on the buy side, if you are an enterprise, not a service provider, IT team, we want to give you an opportunity to download one of our peak matrix analyses. Everest Group's peak matrix. So when we talked about the Pinnacle earlier, that's comparing buy-side companies to each other. The peak matrix compares service providers to each other, and as well as technology providers and other types of IT and BPO activities. So if you are on the buy side and you have an interest in any of the spend categories listed here, cloud services, either North America or Europe, analytics and AI, mainframe, application transformation services, digital workplace, that's like your help desk, and that's the name for all that stuff that's happening on to support your workers, IT security services, network services. Any of those, we'll be happy to share that peak matrix analysis. These are pretty robust reports. You've probably seen the graphic with the mountains, but they also cover service delivery capabilities, tools, IP, commercial models, and the record of client satisfaction providers have had. So if you're sourcing these categories, these are kind of a document you can't live without. I will put out there that if you are already a member of our Outsourcing Excellence Program, you don't need to complete this survey. You already have access to any of these, but please let me know, or let your account manager or your client director know if you see one on this list that you want to access and you don't have access to the reports portal. We're happy to send you the report or the link to it. But I'm happy to see a bunch of you asking for these, because I will tell you, when I was doing sourcing myself, I wish I had this level of market intelligence, because it's really, really valuable in understanding what's happening in the outside market. So with that, I'm going to, I just want to mention what we do, specifically, how we support sourcing teams, procurement teams. The categories that we cover are on the right here. Everest Group is really focused on complex services, so IT services, BPO, some industry-specific verticals, engineering services. We have market intelligence as well as price benchmarks across all of those, and we mainly have two membership organizations, although we do small projects. Our main memberships are market intelligence and pricing as analytics as a service, which is more about the commercial side. So if either of those are of interest, let us know. We understand that a lot of sourcing teams haven't really been familiar with Everest Group in the past, but that's a stakeholder we've worked more and more with, and we have a pretty big collection of members at this point. So we'd love to help you out. And our goal is to help sourcing and vendor management teams make better decisions, or help their stakeholders make better decisions. So the more the better. So let's move on to Q&A. And I think there's a couple of good questions here. I know we've all been trying to ask them as we went. I'm gonna call the question on market intelligence investments in IT compared to other categories. So, Venusia, I see you have some thoughts on that. I'll let you start, and maybe I'll add to your comments. And the question, just to reread it, sorry. The question was just, it would be good to understand market intelligence investments in IT and how that compares to other categories, understanding that Pinnacles may invest across the board. Is there a difference in IT category versus others? So go ahead.
What I've seen, I think, is that it's more common in the complex categories. So when you look at the categories as a whole, there are two things that I see. One is how much procurement involvement is there within that particular category in its sourcing processes. And the second thing is how complex is that category. So if we just look at the first point, then something like, an IT would have more MI investment as compared to a legal services, just because procurement is more involved in that category, right? But when you look at the second point as well, which is on the complexity of the category, I think if you, deep dive into within IT, something like software or services would have more MI investments as compared to hardware, because that's typically more complex to source software or services as compared to hardware. So two overarching views, in terms of complexity of the category and level of procurement involvement. And it really varies on that aspect, and the spend levels, of course, as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Definitely, the more complex the category, the more it makes sense to have market intelligence. I would also say that there are more focused, deep market intelligence providers in the IT space than there are in other categories. So if you're looking for all other indirect, you may have, there's lots of general market intelligence providers that can provide, insights across a broad, but maybe not so deep range of categories. For IT, people tend to invest in market intelligence from companies like Gartner or Forrester or Everest Group. We are a bit different than the first two, but it's all sort of the same model within IT of providing, a lot deeper knowledge on the marketplace, the suppliers, and the contracting, and all of that. So it makes sense that you would have, and I think our data, if I look back at that services pinnacle, Venusia, our data for total spend, is higher. I don't think that's just a time, there was a time lag there. I think it's also that IT, for all the reasons you mentioned, demands a higher investment in market intelligence. Any other questions? I'm going to look back. I know we were answering a bunch of them as we went. See if there's any that we want to repeat. I know someone asked about industries. This is really a cross-industry study. And I don't know if the demographics are in here, but we can put that in the final deck. But essentially, really across all different industries. There was also a question about rebadging, which is a little bit more focused specifically on outsourcing IT services. We've seen rebadging for a long time. It's kind of in pockets. It's not, it's the original outsourcing, right, tactic. I think there is sort of a question there, and Banushi made a great point that, that we struggle for talent, rebadging right now makes a lot of sense. There's a big shortage in IT talent, for anyone who hasn't noticed, and that rebadging probably makes sense right now. It's not necessarily a strategic new tactic though, and a little bit different than the reduction of FTEs that we talked about earlier. And with that, I think we'll wrap up. Like we said, we'll be on LinkedIn Live in about, I think it starts in half an hour, and we can paste the link in the chat. That'll be kind of a more casual conversation. If you have questions we didn't cover, you're welcome to come there. And of course, our emails are here as well. These slides, for anyone who didn't ask yet, the slides and the recording will go out to everyone who registered. And I also want to encourage you to keep an eye on our blog. We have a blog with perspectives on IT services, on outsourcing in general. There's a lot of different interesting topics there. There's a good one from Banushi herself that's on there. We also have regularly updated insights on our webpage, as well as in our social feeds. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter and everywhere else that people go. So thanks everyone for attending today. Enjoyed the conversation and hope to see you over on LinkedIn soon.